Today, we talk about Q&A time again. Someone asked, MD versus DO, what it do? And I'm gonna just give you my personal casual take on it. If you want like a very detailed breakdown, I'm sure there's a bajillion other videos on YouTube's that go through it, but just my personal experience with DO versus MD. So I am an MD, which means I went to an allopathic medical school, aka traditional medical school, aka old school medical school. And when you graduate, you become a doctor of medicine, MD. Now, in terms of like ranking, when you hear classically within the rumor mill grapevine of medical community, the ranking of MD surpasses DO, and then technically MD from a Caribbean school goes like third-ish, and then foreign grad doctors that are not only foreign but also went to foreign medical schools will rank below that. Now, how true that truly is as far as like admissions to residency programs, how competitive you are in your applications off the rip, all that, I have no idea. I've never been on an interview committee. These are just things I've heard over and over and over again from program directors and or just rumor mills and whatnot. So I think just traditionally, it makes sense from the standpoint of, residency programs and the money that they get, which technically comes from, Medicare, Medicaid, I believe. From what I've heard, the government subsidizes these residency programs, meaning if you're going to, when you're in training as a doctor, once you finish medical school and after you've spent a buttload of money on tuition fees, now you're getting paid while going through your medical actual training. So where's that money coming from? The hospital's not paying you. Your paychecks will come from the hospital, but the hospital creates that money to give you from the government. And I would think that the big picture is that the government wants to produce doctors for their country, so to service their citizens. So they will subsidize these hospitals to offer these training programs with a certain number of spots allotted based on all these different factors, who knows. And then it's with that money. And I believe it's twofold money. One half of it is to be given to you as a salary, and the other half of it is to pay the fees associated with training you, faculty, physicians within the hospital that, train you, that's an extra burden on them to train you. Administrator fees and da-da-da-da-da. I would imagine that's how it goes. And maybe it's not an entirely 50-50 split, but this is just what I've heard. Now, I say all that to say that basically what's happening here is if you look at the country as a whole, who would they rather take on as their residency applicants? Is it going to be foreign grads? Because who knows if those foreign grads are going to just come here, get their education and their training, and then just go back to their countries. I don't fucking know. So why would you invest in them, right? And then secondly, as far as like the tiers go, I don't know how they end up being choosy of MDs over DOs or MDs from Caribbean schools, for example, but it is what it is. I don't know the rhyme or reason. I say all that to then say that personally, I have trained alongside both MDs from Caribbean schools and DOs from DO schools that all were accepted into my same residency training program, let alone my fellowship program. And, it really comes down to the individual. I've met super smart DO doctors that are way smarter than allopathic, traditional MD trained folks like myself. I've met MDs from these Caribbean schools that are very, very talented physicians as well. But you have to remember too, I was given these stories in the past about how I basically felt like I fell ass backwards into my training program because I was lucky enough to have the prestige associated with an allopathic MD program to be able to match into a not as competitive internal medicine program, as opposed to a super competitive neurosurgery program at Harvard. I never would have gotten to that point with my grades, for sure. I just slacked off way too hard. And I have since turned that around, so I don't want anyone to have the impression that I'm like a super shitty doctor because I didn't study super hard in medical school. That's a bunch of baloney. I met a ton of doctors who did way better on certain standardized tests than I did, and they're just like, I wouldn't trust them within 8 billion feet of me if I needed medical care. I'm just saying. Now, again, going back to, I felt like I kind of fell ass backwards into my position, and I have since corrected my wrongs and gone on to be what I think is a very good clinician. But I know that, with that being my situation, if I had done the same, if I had had the same work ethic in a DO school, or especially a Caribbean MD school, there's no way anyone would even look at my application twice. So for me to fall backwards into my training program, whereas others coming from a Caribbean MD program or a DO program really worked their ass off and really did great, and they show up and they're very talented doctors off the rip, it just goes to show, like, those were the cream of the crop of those programs. So if you think you have what it takes to be a doctor, and let's say you just can't get into an MD school, an allopathic MD school, don't be heartbroken over going to a DO school or a Caribbean MD school. But you got to be careful, because, you really got to sit back and think how seriously you want to take this. I know Caribbean MD graduates who went on to have multi-million-dollar operations in various competitive specialties. So it's definitely possible. And, my sister's a DO, so I have no hate on DOs. The DO, so that's a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and osteopathy or osteopathic medicine. I don't exactly know entirely what it entails or the official definition. Again, this is all Googleable. But what I've come to find is more of like not a chiropractor friendly-esque approach, but it's like an added component to their medical philosophy. The big picture being that they learn all that ish in DO school, but they also learn all the ish that I learned in MD school. So it's almost like they know more than I do, and they take the same standardized tests that we do. They have their own sets of standardized tests called not Qualcomm, that's a freaking tech company. Comlex, I think it's Comlex is their standardized test, whereas for MD programs, they take the USMLE, US Medical Licensing Exam. But the kicker is DO graduates can also take the USMLE. They don't have to take the Comlex. They can take the USMLE as well. So so a lot of them take the USMLE and apply to standard, not DO specific training programs, but also MD training programs, and they do get into some of them. Like I said, in my own program, I had DOs, both in fellowship and residency. Typically, the ultra competitive, uber, high tier programs, they will not touch DOs with a 10-foot pole, 11-foot pole. I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but traditionally they're in-house cultivated Ivy Leaguers that stay in-house. They're just a different breed of doctor, different breed of applicant. There's all different shapes and sizes of individuals, let alone doctors. So point of it all is, don't be discouraged by getting into a DO school or a Caribbean medical school, but understand that if you get in, and they are all getting more competitive every year. So not only MD schools, let alone MD schools, but DO and Caribbean MD schools, they're all getting way more competitive with each year. With every passing year, the passing score on these standardized tests during medical school are continuing to rise. So, it's just one of those things. And I think if you think you have what it takes to be a doctor, and you just aren't a good, quote, test taker, for example, or you just kind of screwed up in high school or with your SATs or in college with your MCATs, and you could only pull off a certain echelon of school tier as far as like DO schools or Caribbean med schools. If you still think you have what it takes to be a doctor and you are committed to medical school, you will do well if you work hard and actually put in the hours and actually work, and not do what I did, which is just kind of like, sleepwalk through it. And I've said before, I pat myself on the back and kind of applaud that disaster, because I can't believe with how little effort I was talented enough to pull that off. It's truly a blessing. But, I would not recommend that, and I definitely wouldn't recommend that to my former self. I really wish I'd taken it more seriously then, because, even though I fell ass backwards through the MD route, luckily, to find myself in a position to still redeem myself and be the comeback player of the year. Am I right? I basically pumped myself through medical school after medical school. I realized after getting into residency and realizing, holy shit, man, this is the real deal finally. You're finally a doctor. You finally got responsibility. You finally can't be a dumbass. You can't just sleepwalk through the shit. You got to know your shit. And that's when I basically put myself through medical school within a 1-year span during the hardest possible year of my entire medical career, the intern year, your first year as a doctor. That is the absolute worst schedule, the worst hours, the worst just, oh man, I do not miss that at all. But yet, because of my desire, I was able to pull it off. and really become a good doctor, in my opinion, and get into a very competitive specialty, no less, and blah, 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 blah. So it is possible, but, I would recommend you do that when you were supposed to, aka medical school. That's what you're there to do. And if you're willing to do that, I don't care at what tier of medical school you go, if you rise to the cream of the crop at whatever level, you will get wherever you're trying to go, depending on your goals. So, you got to be realistic, you got to be very driven, and you got to really understand what the fuck you're doing in medical school. Are you really there for the right reasons? You really want to be a doctor? Because if you don't, it ain't gonna fly, my guy. Yeah, but as far as, when all is said and done and the dust settles, what's the difference between an MD and a DO? Really just the title. I mean, that's not really what makes you a good doctor, not the title. It's, you as an individual and how committed you are, and what kind of ethics you hold, and all those kinds of things. So hope that answers your question. If you need more specifics on it, let me know. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. We out. Peace.